you are probably going to be a very successful computer person. You're going to go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. And I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It'll be because you're an asshole.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Rocha. I'm a writer, producer, and host in San Diego, California, and massive fan of this film and very excited that finally, as The Rock used to say, we have opened the doors to explore The Social Network on this show, Steve, and we've got an incredible guest who's joining us.
That's what how could we possibly enter into The Social Network without film critic, friend of the Cine-Files, friend of ours, my partner on Enterprise Incidents, Scott Mantz. Finally, welcome back to the Cine-Files.
Finally, when you sent the email, Steve Morris, it said, "It's time." I could not believe it. I thought I was someone's playing a bad joke on me. How long have we been talking about doing The Social Network for the Cine-Files? Because talk about a movie that seriously is perfect for the Steve Morris, John Rocha deep dive of movies. A film, John, it's one of your favorites.
Yeah.
It's one of mine, certainly, and it has stayed one of my favorites of the 21st century since it opened in 2010. What a great movie this is.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, I've had trouble getting my head around this thing. And there's so much here. It's exactly the Cine-Files thing to talk about because in terms of filmmaking and craftsmanship, there's so much here. In terms of the movie and the emotions of the story, there's so much here. But then in terms of the broader world that we live in and the importance of Facebook and social networks with where we are politically, socially, everything about our lives, there's a lot here. And so I'm just going to finish it by saying that. Man, there's a lot here, guys.
There is a lot here. And the thing is that it's a really interesting way you put it, Steve, because I remember when I saw the movie at a press screening at the end of September in 2010, and I was driving home from the screening and I pulled over on the side of a La Cienega Boulevard. I couldn't even wait to get home. And I started writing down all these notes about the movie. And I had an epiphany about the film, which I'll share with you, later into the podcast here, because I don't want to blow it at the top here. But it's one of the very, very rare movies that stays great over the years, but also takes on deeper meanings as the years go by. It's exactly like you pointed out, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, as we've said many times on the show, Steve, the classic films are the ones that you can revisit multiple times at different times in your life, and you get something completely different out of them. You watch scenes that hit you in a certain way when you were younger, and as you get older, they hit you completely different. And certainly this country and this world has gone through an incredible amount of revolutions since 2010, both culturally and politically and technology-wise as well. And we're having these conversations, and we just had a 50-minute conversation about AI and the progression of technology. And I just saw Joe Rogan complaining that a ChatGPT or whatever, they created an episode of his podcast on its own with someone else. And it was it scared the hell out of him. And it's this kind of coding, this kind of compute, this kind of creation, this stuff that we're seeing in The Social Network is the beginnings. And to think of how quickly that has consumed our lives over the last 2 decades, this film is a harbinger and a time capsule for what we are all going through now. And I think to me, this is the greatest film of the last 23 years. Honestly. And it is just watching it again for the podcast. I'm so excited to jump into it because of all the incredible stuff that kept popping through as I was watching, going, my God, there's so much here.
For sure. Yep. Agree 100%.
It's this warrior in a room, and you think it's this snooty little film about rich kids, but it's actually this jagged-edged, rough film that bounces up against you and forces you to pay attention to it. and it makes you listen and makes you watch what's going on. And, the controversy around numerous people who are involved in this film is also something we're going to explore on the show, I imagine, because it's an interesting mixture of elements that created this movie. And I think that's why it also still endures.
Hear, hear.
It's absolutely true. And by the way, we put out to our people on Patreon if they want to ask specific questions. We've already gotten a few, and I think we'll get some more. And John, I think Patreon is one of the great places where people can come to support the Cine-Files.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is so fun to hear from our fans, our patrons who support the show and also have questions that we can read out on the show. And look, there's many levels that you can support the Cine-Files and where we're trying to get to and the next levels we want to go to. So many of you have told us how much you've enjoyed our work over the years, and especially bringing on incredible guests like Scott Mantz to come on and spend hours with us breaking down films.
Hours.
Yeah, these are the gifts. These are the gifts that you get, and supporting us as we get to the next level is so important. So head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/the-Cine-Files, and see the multiple tiers and benefits you get. And of course, as Steve mentioned, one of those benefits is being able to ask a question and have your name etched into an episode of the podcast forever.
Yeah. And the other reason why you should do that for everyone listening is this. Since I did my first episode of the Cine-Files, which I think was now, what was it, like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when we did Wrath of Khan, and when I came back to do 2001 with you and Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and especially Blade Runner, in my travels, I guess, around LA, whatever. There are so many movie fans out here in Los Angeles. And, I get people who come up to me to this day who I think they're going to come up to me because of this or because of that or whatever. And they'll say, I loved your episode of the Cine-Files on Blade Runner. And that was recorded years ago. Yeah. And I still get stopped or people want to talk about it. And that's the impact of what makes the Cine-Files a movie show unlike any other. I've said this before on the Cine-Files. I've said this elsewhere, but the Cine-Files really is the Citizen Kane of
Thank you.
That's so kind, Scott. Well, and I think it's part of exactly what we're talking about, the social network, is that these movies are things we want to go back to. They don't just give you 2 hours of entertainment and then you walk away. They're things you think about and want to talk about. And that's what we'd like to do here. And the first thing I want to talk about is, John Rocha, how did you first come to the social network?
Well, I wasn't in a place to get a press screening yet in my life. So I came to it like a regular film goer with a bunch of my friends. We went to see it here in Los Angeles. And I remember being just absolutely psyched to see this from the trailer. I was becoming a Jesse Eisenberg fan. I was certainly an Aaron Sorkin fan by this point. So there was so much about this. And Fincher, who is one of my top 5 favorite directors, having this all come together, plus talking about Facebook, which at that time was becoming something that everybody kind of wanted to be a part of. It was still the beginning stages. All of that combined together to get me very excited. We see it, and I just remember being transfixed. There are rare movies where I feel like I'm running behind the train of the movie, and Social Network is one of those where I was just constantly running behind, trying to catch up because of so much that they were delivering. And so I remember just talking for like 2 or 3 hours afterwards with people who I went to see it with at the bar afterwards, because there was so much to explore here.
What about you, Scott?
So yes, it was at the end of September of 2010, and I went to this press screening. It was on the Sony lot, and while I was driving home, I was halfway home, and I was completely blown away by the film to the point where when I got in my car, I did not put on the radio like I usually do. I just instinctively put it on right away. I was just racing through this movie in my head over and over again. And I pulled over to the road and was writing down all these notes because I was doing the interviews the next day for the junket.
Nice.
And I ran my theory about the film by Aaron Sorkin, the screenwriter, the Oscar-winning screenwriter for this film. Of course, he's an Emmy winner multiple times over for, West Wing and so on. And he confirmed with me that was his MO. That was his goal. That was what he had in mind. And it's just like the social network itself, just like the Facebook, and then Facebook grew and grew and grew exponentially. My love for this film and the thoughts that I have about it, the feelings I have about it, have grown in the same way. It's really something. Steve, how about you?
So for me, it's so funny. There was a time when I was an absolutely regular moviegoer, and if you were going to track when that slowed down, it's 2009 and 2010, because those are the toughest years I ever had in my life, and that caused me not to go out that much. And then 2011 was when we adopted my son Jax, and so from that point forward, I didn't go out to movies very much. So I did not see it in the theater. I remember the trailer, which we'll talk about. That trailer is remarkable.
Yeah.
And I was a huge West Wing fan. Scott, if Star Trek, the original series, is not my favorite TV show of all time, the other one in contention is The West Wing. I mean, like, I absolutely adore The West Wing. I love Aaron Sorkin's writing. I was a huge David Fincher fan. I can't believe I didn't see this in the theater, but I didn't. We watched it at home, and I had the same reaction, which is I was just blown away by the complexity and the craftsmanship and the detail. And thinking about it now, it's we've already said it. The movie just takes on more and more resonance the farther away I get from when it came out.
What's interesting is the film won 3 Academy Awards for adapted screenplay for Aaron Sorkin, for editing, and for score for Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. Can you tell me off the top of your head the movie that won Best Picture this year over The Social Network?
I can, only because it's in my notes. But
is it The King's Speech?
It is The King's Speech.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I totally like. I totally like The King's Speech.
Of course.
Yeah.
The King's Speech is a crowd pleaser. It's a certain I would say it's an easy movie in terms of being Oscar bait, but it's not a very ambitious film. And to be honest with both of you and for everyone listening, it is not a film that I've seen again since 2010, where I've seen Social Network probably 20 times. Although not recently. I hadn't seen it since before, definitely before like COVID hit, and now watching it now is like watching it fresh. But what's interesting is that with a film like Social Network, like it means something to you when you see it, and it means something different to you over the years. But then just through life and circumstance, it means something different to you when you see it later. It's really just one of those movies that just like, it's like a fine wine. It's extraordinary, but why this didn't win Best Picture just still baffles my mind. It is freaking great. Like, John, this is one of the best movies of the 21st century.
Yeah.
I mean, is The King's Speech one of the best movies of the 21st century? No, it's not.
Like you said, a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
So a little bit of pre-production. This is based on the book The Accidental Billionaires by Ben Mesrich. Now, the book hadn't come out when Aaron Sorkin started working on this screenplay. He read I think a few pages. I think he read 40 pages or so, and immediately decided that he wanted to do it. Now, I decided I did read a book about Facebook because I wanted to get some sense of the reality. I chose not to read this particular book because I didn't want to reinforce this narrative. I wanted to see a different perspective on it. One of the interesting things about Ben Mesrich's book that the movie is based on, Accidental Billionaires, is that he didn't talk to Mark Zuckerberg. In fact, he didn't really talk to anybody involved in Facebook except for Eduardo Saverin. And so the perspective of the book is coming very much from Eduardo's perspective.
Yeah.
And this is the first thing we had to deal with, is that there's a lot of art where when I think of this historical figure, I'm actually thinking of the fictitious portrayal of that historical figure. So if I think about Henry V or Richard III, I'm thinking about Shakespeare. And those things aren't necessarily reality. If I were to think about William Randolph Hearst, in my brain, I picture Charles Foster Kane. But that's not the same thing. This is a very, very contemporary portrayal of someone who became very, very important. And I think it's very hard for me not to picture Jesse Eisenberg for Mark Zuckerberg.
I feel like Jesse Eisenberg was playing Mark Zuckerberg in movies before he actually played Mark Zuckerberg. It was so. It was like
Yeah.
he was born to play this guy, and there was nobody else who could have done it better. And all the sort of nervous tics that, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but all the sort of nervous tics that Jesse Eisenberg has displayed in films like Adventureland and so on, and Roger Dodger, he really just like leaned into that in a very confident way and an empowering way, where he, like, everything he said to everyone else was very condescending. It just had such a holier than thou approach. Like, it just magnified his performance. And after The Social Network, I hate to say it, but I can't really see Eisenberg in any other way. He's still Mark Zuckerberg to me. Is that bad?
Even when he played Lex Luthor, he had the Mark Zuckerberg aspect to it in the Dawn of Justice film. And you know what's fascinating too is after this film came out, all of a sudden Mark Zuckerberg started showing up in public. You know, he'd been kind of a private guy.
Yeah, sure.
This film, in a way, to almost like fight back against the perception that Jesse Eisenberg is essentially playing Mark Zuckerberg. He wanted to come out to try to diffuse that and show, no, this is who I really am. And I wasn't obsessed with this girl, and I've got this other thing, and try to push back on all the narratives from the movie. But in the end, now, all these years later, he's almost reinforced it rather than destroyed it. So I think that's a fascinating indirect result of this movie coming out and forcing Zuckerberg out of the shadows.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So Sorkin reads this excerpt essentially from this book that's still being written. And what he says is it wasn't the technology that he was interested in. It wasn't the importance of the website or of social media or anything like that. And to be really honest, and I learned this too in reading about him writing the Steve Jobs movie, which is another bio of a very powerful industrialist, is that Sorkin doesn't really get technology. I mean, that's part of he's not a technological guy. What attracted him was the story about friendship, loyalty, jealousy, power, and class. And all of those things are interwoven within this film. And that's the thing that he saw that made him want to do it. And what was interesting is that, so Sorkin, Ben Mesrich, who's writing the book, he's continuing to research and write the book. Sorkin, who's writing the movie, is researching and writing the movie. And they just call each other every once in a while and say, hey, I found this. Oh, I found this. But it's parallel courses. It's not that Sorkin is using Ben's research. So that they're very, very different, these things. It sounds like essentially the moment Sorkin said, I would like to do this, the movie was greenlit. Like, it just was instant, even before I think Fincher was attached.
Is this the second film we've done with Scott Mantz where a novel is being written at the same time as the film is being made? Wasn't that going on with 2001?
It was.
So how interesting.
How interesting. Wow, John, way to go. Score.
It just seems the parallels. So
That was a great pull you just made, because that hadn't occurred to me at all. So then Fincher comes on. The casting process, they expected to, because they basically have to cast all these young actors, and they expected that they were going to spend forever trying to cast the role of Mark Zuckerberg. The one named person that came along that Fincher turned down was Jonah Hill, was up for the part.
Oh, well, I cannot see him in this now. No.
I mean, he has proven himself to be a really good actor.
Sure. He sure has. He's a 2-time Oscar nominee. Sure.
So they basically went, well, I guess we're just going to have to audition every young actor in New York, in LA, and across the country, and it's going to be a huge search. And Jesse Eisenberg tapes himself for the role, sends a QuickTime file in, which surprises me because this is pretty early for actors to be sending in QuickTime files. Yeah. It gets to David Fincher. He watches it, and he had seen a couple of things with Jesse Eisenberg before this. He was familiar with him. He looks at this thing, goes over to Aaron Sorkin, who's in the next office, shows the QuickTime file to Aaron Sorkin, who basically says, well, I guess the hard part's done.
we found our Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. The one other I don't have a ton of pre-production for this. There's more of it we'll get in as we get into the movie, but the one other thing is that they did a lot of rehearsal. There is a lot of rehearsal. And on the Blu-ray, there's tons of behind the scene where you just kind of see them rehearsing. And it's I highly recommend some of these bonus features that I don't always think they're great. these ones, if you really want to watch the filmmaking process and just kind of observe it as the fly on the wall, these are really good. And what was most interesting to me is that in the rehearsals, it is Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher, and it's them talking to each other. And what it reminded me of is, John, another movie that we did where the writer was elevated almost to the level of the director was Sidney Lumet and Patty Chayefsky in Network.
Oh yeah.
Is that Lumet gave Chayefsky so much respect, and that's what I saw here. Not that they were agreeing all the time, but that they were arguing over every line and going, what does this, because basically Fincher, major control freak, obviously, he wanted to understand what every line meant and why that line had to be in the movie, and was challenging Sorkin. And you could see Sorkin, it seemed like these just great artistic conversation between these two geniuses working things through. And you see the actors there who are just sitting listening a lot of the time as they're having these discussions, and then the actors are asking questions, and they're working through all the moves so that they really know exactly what they're trying to do. It was like serious deep script analysis and character analysis. It just looks it looks like the way I would want to work if I was ever in a situation like that, you know?
Wow.
It's Sorkin, right? So if it's going to be Sorkin, you got to rehearse. You got to hit those patterns. You got to hit those rhythms.
Oh yeah.
Beats. And certainly that's something that, as an actor, I'm sure they cherished being able to rehearse it so that you could get that down as a rhythm and a pattern when you're delivering these lines back and forth. Yeah.
The way that Sorkin writes, like I remember after he won his Oscar for The Social Network, I went to a film festival, and I was at the airport getting my bag in the baggage claim, and so was he. And I went up to him, and he remembered me from the junket interview.
Oh, no.
And I said to him, "Can you please just write everything, please?" Because this movie, and I mean, I've seen certainly a lot of episodes of West Wing and Newsroom and the Steve Jobs movie, but I love every word is so important in this movie. Every single word, where when I was rewatching it, I kept stopping and rewinding finally I put the subtitles on because I felt like I was missing something in the dialogue. And that was a revelation to watch the film with subtitles, that even though I didn't need to, but there is like brilliant dialogue that just flies by. It's an exhilarating thing to rewatch this movie with a fresh set of eyes.
So, speaking of which, I think we should get into the film, but I want to say one thing first, and I will probably hit this point multiple times as we go along, which is that the reality is this is not Mark Zuckerberg. Right. This is a character of Mark Zuckerberg. And in listening to them talk about the film, and particularly Jesse Eisenberg, he would continually correct himself. As he would say, well, when Mark Zuckerberg the character of Mark Zuckerberg thinks this, because and this based on the reading that I did, if you look at the big facts, with one or two major exceptions, this movie's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
But none of the conversations and motivations and internal things are based on any reality. They're based on Aaron Sorkin, They're what he wanted to say about not the real Mark Zuckerberg, but about these characters. And so that's where, we just have to kind of check in and go, because what we see, particularly right from the beginning, of the motivations of this guy, what he wants, why is he doing it, that is not Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
That is a character. But shall we get into this movie?
Let's do it.
I accept your friend request.
Okay. So we are going to start. We talked about Aaron Sorkin's dialogue and its speed and how hard it is to keep up with. Well, we're going to start with a 9-page long scene of the fastest possible dialogue. And I got to tell you, although I type about 80 words a minute, me trying to keep up and write down all these lines, it was not easy. It took me a long time just for this one scene. When Jesse Eisenberg got the scene, he was like, oh man, this scene is so great. It's too bad. I'm sure by the time we get on the set, they'll probably cut it in half. And they had not changed a word.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
This opening scene takes place in a bar. As we've said, and most people know, David Fincher likes a lot of takes.
Yeah.
He has no problem with going through take after take after take. In fact, he feels good reasons for it. And the first thing he did was when they first start doing the scene is that he has all those background actors. Normally background actors, they mouth things. They don't actually speak because it would interfere with the soundtrack. So they're just going, mouthing words, and the set is quiet so you can hear the actors. The first 3 or 4 takes, he had all the background actors talk at full voices and have full conversations.
Wow.
Wow.
John, as an actor, how do you think, how would that change your performance, do you think?
I mean, if you've done the right rehearsal and you've memorized the lines and you've really put them into your bones, that is a great test. It's like a tennis player that gets onto center court at Wimbledon or the US Open or whatever. Like, you can do all the practice you want before you step out there. Once you step out there, it's a whole nother ball game. So it's either going to make you electric or it's going to make you shut down. So I think it's a great idea to add this electricity to the scene by having the actors hear other people having these conversations. And in essence, you turn it into a much more realistic scene because that's how a conversation would naturally go in real life. So you add more authenticity to the performance even without the actors even knowing it. So it's a gutsy move, but I appreciate it, the confidence of Fincher to go ahead and try and do that with them.
So Steve, as a screenwriter, as a filmmaker, isn't the math of a screenplay sort of work out to each page is a minute of film?
That's the theory, yes.
Okay. Well, in that case, you said that this was 9 pages of dialogue at the bar between Erica Albright and Mark Zuckerberg. 9 pages of dialogue in a 5-minute scene.
Yeah.
I clocked it. I went, that scene was only 5 minutes, but you're saying it was 9 pages of dialogue. That's how fast they were going. They were like you listen to your books on tape and twice speed. That's what they were doing.
I've actually been listening to that Facebook book at 3 times speed.
Yikes.
But yeah, so they're going super fast. And the first thing that we hear is,
did you know there are more people with genius IQs living in China than there are people of any kind living in the United States?
That can't possibly be true.
It is.
a couple of things about this. The first thing is if you go to a development meeting with your script, executives are going to be very concerned that everybody understands exactly what's going on. We have to make sure that everything is clear. Aaron Sorkin's philosophy is the exact opposite. He wants people to be behind. He wants them to be clawing to catch up to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
One's going to spoon feed the audience. One is going to expect the audience to be smart. And this line about IQs is going like, wait, what did he say? And it's Jesse Eisenberg as Mark Zuckerberg, and it's Rooney Mara as Erica Albright.
Yep.
The casting idea that Fincher said he was looking for was Catherine Ross from The Graduate, but with a hard edge. That's what he wanted.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And I certainly think she delivers.
Yeah. This is like the first introduction of Rooney Mara for a lot of people. And then, of course, from here, she's gone on to do so many things. But yeah.
Yeah, she had done a horror movie, that kind of came and went. And then she did this. And of course, then she went on to work with Fincher again in the American version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is fine. It's not like, the foreign film versions, which are much, much better. But I think that Rooney Mara is terrific in this film, even though she doesn't have a lot. It's like one of those roles where she doesn't have a whole lot of screen time. I think maybe like 3 or 4 scenes, but the character leaves such an impact on Zuckerberg, the way every time Zuckerberg sees Erica Albright, here's this guy who has no problem telling a room full of lawyers to basically go F themselves in so many words. But Erica Albright shakes him up to the point where, when you get to the end of the film, you realize just how much she had as an impact on him. It's really interesting.
By the way, there are not more geniuses in China than there are people in the United States. China is about 4 times the size of the United States population. That would mean that more than 25% of people in China have genius IQs. That is not true. But what's interesting is that the way that Sorkin writes this scene is that not only are we trying to catch up, but she's trying to catch up because he keeps changing what he's saying. And so and this is like just genius level screenwriting, is she's responding frequently to the thing that he said a sentence before, and then he's passing her and then coming back, and then she's passing him and coming back, and there are multiple tracks happening at the same time. It's like literal masterclass stuff. We find out that he got a 1600 on his SATs and is still trying to figure out how to distinguish himself, maybe an a cappella group, or maybe getting into a final club. Did you know anything about final clubs before watching this movie?
I thought you go to college, you try to get into a fraternity, or you stay the independent route. That's it.
Yeah, I had no idea. And this rarefied world of Harvard is so... That's why I think it's so interesting that Aaron Sorkin was attracted to the ideas of class. Yeah. And certainly this is part of it. And this is the oldest old school class structure you can imagine in the United States.
Yeah, I don't truck in these circles. So to me, this all was just a fantastic exploration of seeing a guy who, as you said, has all this intelligence, but he has given meaning to things that you objectively looking out from the outside, he shouldn't, right? Having Erica affect him for the rest of his life, as it's portrayed in the film.
Yep.
It is because he's given her meaning. Her opinion has meaning because she rejects him in this moment. And then later he goes on to write the blog, which we'll get to, and he's drunkenly right, and he tears her apart. And as we've become more knowledgeable about incel behavior, about male behavior towards women, about sometimes these people who are like on the spectrum or nerdy and can be sometimes, how can I say this, can be clumsy or awkward or just not able to communicate with women effectively, they turn to anger after the rejection happens because a woman has a right to say, I don't want to go out with you or date you in a conversation. And so we see samples of that here in this opening in the back and forth. He is trying to control her in his own way in the back and forth. I think it's the genius of Sorkin's logic. I will control what's a joke, what isn't a joke. I will constantly put you on your toes to make you feel like I'm intelligent. I'm smarter than you because I'm coming up with all this stuff. And then when you don't fall for it or you push back, then I'm going to insult the college you go to. I'm going to insult that you actually need to study. So these little things that he is constant. It's a power scene. He is trying to be in control the whole time because he has already ceded control to Erica from the beginning of the conversation because he has feelings for her and she doesn't have feelings for him. So watching him navigate this back and forth with Erica is truly fascinating now through the perspective that we see now more of a mainstream understanding of incel male behavior towards women.
Excellent point, Johnny.
You actually gave me a question that I'd like to ask, which is, what is the name? Because we say that they're dating. I mean, they both say, she says she's breaking up with him later, and he says we're dating. So what is the nature of their relationship before we walk into this bar?
Well, she gives us a clue that dating you has been the most difficult thing because of blah, blah, blah. So clearly this has been they probably weren't together too long.
That's what I think.
Imagine they were together too long.
I agree. I don't see them like being together for too long. She probably tolerated him until this moment, which said, who needs this?
Right. Because women, you experiment in college. You go, okay, yeah, I'll give it a chance. I'll see what's here. And then, when it's done, it's done. The fact that they're doing it, she's, very open to do it in a full bar shows the level of respect the lower level of respect that she has for him because she would. And then even when they do the friends thing, she's like, yeah, I just said that to be nice. I don't actually want to be friends with you ever. Because he has burnt it and made her feel inadequate. And that's not how you get a woman. So I'm sure he did this multiple times. And then she just kind of agreed to meet him that night. And absolutely was like, this is done. Get out of here. I don't want to be with you anymore. And it's his own fault, because he tried to take control.
I think she makes that decision in the scene. I don't think she. I don't think she had decided that before she got in here.
Oh, you don't think she? Oh, I do. I think she decided to break up with him before she even showed up. But I think she decided not to be friends with him in the course of the scene. That's what I would say.
By the way, one of the things I think that's interesting is he's thinking through Final Club and a cappella group. Is she says,
from a woman's perspective, sometimes not singing in an a cappella group is a good thing.
This is serious.
On the other hand, I do like guys who row crew.
Which we're going to see a lot of guys who row later on in the film.
Oh, yeah.
But mostly we're focusing on this Final Club thing.
Not Finals Club. Yeah.
Not Finals Club. And I do like the moment, by the way, as he keeps jumping from topic to topic and she's trying to keep up.
Would you like to talk about something else?
No, It's just since the beginning of the conversation about Finals Club, I think I may have missed a birthday.
And he's still on the final club thing, and starts going through a list of them, and there's a lot of them. And we even talk about Teddy Roosevelt, and that he was in one. And we also hear, and this is a plant of what we're going to see later, is that
Is it true that they send a bus around to pick up girls who want to party with the next Fed chairman?
So you can see why it's so important to get in.
like in his mind, this is a stepping stone to success.
Yeah, for all of his intelligence, he is hung up on the old school social constructs of you don't have value unless you can get women, right? In the male straight approach, you don't have value unless you can get women. You can be intelligent, but what's it matter if you can't sleep with a bunch of girls or a bunch of women? So that's what he's caught up in. And so he thinks he's got to stand out in order to get into these clubs and then also achieve status down the road. So clearly there's a piece of him that wants to get to a position where he is revered and respected, even though he probably abhors almost every human being on the planet. This character does.
Well, and it's also, I mean, getting in these clubs probably will help you in your career and success and all those things. I mean, there's a lot of presidents and people that come out of these. By the way, they have the moment where they said, I mean, do you think if Teddy Roosevelt wasn't in this club, he probably wouldn't have been elected president? And I was like, he wasn't elected president. McKinley was assassinated and he became president. So
true.
He was elected for the second term.
My friend Eduardo made $300,000 betting oil futures one summer, and Eduardo won't come close to getting in. The ability to make money doesn't impress anybody around here.
Must be nice.
One of the big things with Mark, as we talked about status, but it's status with his friend, is that it's important to him that he surpasses his friend Eduardo. It's not just that he does well, it's that the other person doesn't do as well as him.
Mm-hmm.
So you bring up a very, very crucial point about the relationship between Zuckerberg and Eduardo Saverin. We've already seen a moment in the film between Erica Albright and Zuckerberg that is going to have repercussions throughout the movie up to the very, very end, in what I would call a sort of surprise ending of sorts that people maybe didn't see coming. So I was going to wait to say this, but The Social Network is the Citizen Kane of the 21st century.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, it's a great movie. It's the Citizen Kane of the 21st century. No, it is the Citizen Kane of the 21st century because, gentlemen, you have Facebook, the internet. What does the internet provide? Information. What did the newspapers that Charles Foster Kane presided over provide? Information. You have this relationship between Zuckerberg, who is Charles Foster Kane, and Eduardo Saverin, who, when you realize as the movie progresses and you see this rift go separate them further and further and further, Saverin is Jedediah Leland.
Yeah.
He's Leland, played by Joseph Cotton in Citizen Kane. And when you see the beginning of this film and this what Erica Albright represents, and then at the end of the film, Zuckerberg keeps refreshing his page to see if she accepted his request. Erica Albright, is Rosebud. So it really is Citizen Kane of the 21st century.
So it's Justin Timberlake. Well, we'll find out.
So Scott,
not Bernstein, but yeah.
So Scott, I had the advantage of knowing you had already said that. You said that Social Network is Citizen Kane when we did our 200th episode movie in the interview.
Oh yeah.
So because I had heard you say that and had edited it and thought about it, I was thinking about that throughout watching and researching this film. I completely agree with you. Yes. I think there's way more. There are tons of parallels. The biggest one, which you kind of said, but I want to highlight, is Orson Welles and Mankiewicz decided to do a movie about a contemporary figure who was still alive and still exceedingly powerful.
Right.
And that's William Randolph Hearst. I mean, and that's exactly. But I'll tell you what I feel, and I'm very curious to hear when we get to the end what your feelings are about Mark Zuckerberg at the end of the movie. Because it's a very complicated moment that we see at the end. And obviously we'll get there. But the one of the huge differences when I first meet Charles Foster Kane, the adult Charles Foster Kane in the news offices, and Orson Welles turns around, he is the most charming, charismatic, likable, amazing person that you could possibly meet. And then he descends through all of these stages to become this lonely, difficult, angry, sad character. I do not like Mark Zuckerberg at all when I meet him in this bar.
Excellent.
He is exceedingly unlikable, I think.
Mhm.
He is a very difficult character for me personally. That's my reaction to him.
I agree
Yeah.
100%. I don't like Mark Zuckerberg at all. I don't like him from the beginning, and I don't like him. I don't like him more by the time the movie reaches its conclusion. Whereas, Steve, you're absolutely right. When you first see Charles Foster Kane, played by Orson Welles, as he's a grown-up, you're seeing him as a grown-up, as an adult for the first time. He has dreams. He's idealistic. He is someone you aspire to. Like, you admire this person for his ambition, he could just sort of ride on the coattails of his fortune. But what does he do? He buys a dinky little newspaper and builds an empire out of it. And in the process, he loses his character. That's the tragedy of Citizen Kane. And that tragedy is missing in The Social Network because Zuckerberg doesn't have that same arc. And you're right to point out that the one that Kane goes through is very, very different, but there still are so many parallels. I never even thought about the one about how when they wrote Citizen Kane, Hearst was still around, and clearly Zuckerberg is still around as well.
It's interesting. I find him more redeemable than maybe you two do a little bit, and only because I think this is a emotionally fucked up kid. And
Oh yeah.
but I will say this, I think you're absolutely right, Scott, because Citizen Kane is the product of who we were as a country back then.
Mm-hmm.
Zuckerberg in this film, Social Network, is the product of who we are as a country at that time and now.
Sure.
And so that we wouldn't have create a Citizen Kane quite the same way, who'd be charming, do all this. The tragedy about this guy is that he was so obsessed with this girl that according to the narrative of the film, that the entire thing happens because this girl rejected him. The entire thing happens. That's the tragedy, is that he put so much worth into her that he got lost in all of his shit trying to get her back. And at the end, if he had just been a nice guy, had been capable of being a regular human being, nice guy, conversational wise, whatever, he'd have gotten her back, or as a friend at least, if nothing else.
Sure.
And I'm not saying I'm not excusing his behavior, because he does some pretty abhorrent things in the film, especially what we're going to get to with Face Smash. But there is a little bit of sympathy I have for him because he does not have the emotional tools from which to understand the things that he's doing are destroying people and hurting people. But that's the kind of thing that we are producing in this country. And the other things you can connect to Citizen Kane is really interesting. You guys have really put me on an interesting track here mentally, because you could argue Charles Foster Kane grabbing all the San Francisco Chronicle people to come over to his place is him grabbing the Winklevoss plan and using it for himself to do Facebook. That's absolutely connectable in that way.
I knew, John, and I knew, Steve, that as this conversation was going to happen, that there would be other connections, other parallels that even I didn't see coming. But that's the beauty of it. We're all seeing different things about it, and that is another one. Yeah,
he's also accused of yellow journalism, which is what in real life Facebook gets to eventually in our world over the last few years in the election cycles. So it's just a fascinating thing to see the real life combined with the fictitious life that we see in both of those movies. So yeah.
Well, and William Randolph Hearst is well known for supporting and starting the Spanish-American War, and Facebook is now we could blame all sorts of things on Facebook.
All sorts of wars on Facebook.
Sure.
Yeah. We're still the first scene though. Here we go.
back into this scene. One of the techniques, and again, I put this in the master class of screenwriting, is what I will call the dangling topic, which is that what Sorkin is doing is he'll say a thing, and then they're talking about three things at once. We don't respond to that thing until later. And one of the things that comes up earlier, as we first start talking about all these final clubs, is Erica asks, which one is the easiest to get into?
Yeah.
And then we're talking about Rowing Crew and Teddy Roosevelt and other stuff. And then Mark, who clearly picked up on that, says,
You asked me which one was the easiest to get into because you think that that's the one where I'll have the best chance.
he takes it as a dig against him.
Yeah, it's his insecurity and low self-esteem. Because she says that, he assumes this.
I was honestly just asking, okay? I was just asking to ask. Mark, I'm not speaking in code.
Does she speak in code?
I don't think she speaks in code. I think she's trying to keep up with where he's going. And so she's trying to be nice, as a lot of women have to do in situations like this. I'm just trying to be nice to get out of this situation.
Yeah.
And so she's going along with it and saying, which one's the easiest one to get into? And she's legitimately just asking him about it because she wants to find out which ones are the easiest one at conversation, maybe, and then, maybe give some advice or whatever. But he takes such offense to it that now at this point, she's having to kind of work through the situation. Yeah.
By the way, have you guys ever, I'm sure the answer to this is yes, been with a friend who is spiraling the way Mark is spiraling in this moment, where they're just obsessively talking about a thing and you're just kind of there trying to okay, let's get you to the place.
I'll go one up.
In our world, not just talking about movies, but especially whether it's, the three of us together or separately with other people, as when you get into like the superhero stuff or the sci-fi stuff of it all. I mean, look, in the end, Mark Zuckerberg's a nerd.
Yes,
and so are we.
Yeah. And I'll do you one better. I've been the guy spiraling.
Me too. As soon as I asked the question, I was like, I've been that guy.
It's the fucking worst.
Sure.
Because you have low self-esteem, because you don't have the emotional tools, and you're just stumbling around trying to seem like the big man when in fact you're the little man and you don't know it, and she does, and it's tough. Yeah.
And I think the question about easiest, there's a direct link between that to him saying,
I want to try to be straightforward with you and tell you that I think you might want to be a little more supportive. If I get in, I will be taking you to the events and the gatherings, and you'll be meeting a lot of people you wouldn't normally get to meet.
Now, talk about speaking in code. Does he have any idea how she would receive that? And is he intentionally saying it, knowing it's a dig, or is he not aware of the fact that could be interpreted as a dig?
I think he knows what he's doing, because all throughout the film, he's making digs to whether it's Erica, or later, of course, to his friend, Eduardo Saverin. But certainly when he gets to meet like the Winklevi, the Winklevoss twins. I know the Winklevi. I laughed out loud when I heard that again. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows it's going to rub people the wrong way. All throughout the courtroom scenes, when you go back to the scenes in not the courtroom, rather the lawyer's office, he's doing that big time. So yes, I think he knows that it's a dig.
I think when I first saw it, I just was going, "Oh, this guy, he's such an idiot. Like, why is he saying?" And then after watching the whole movie and going back again, yes, I 100% think he knows what he's doing, because you're exactly right, Scott. That's what he does all the time.
Yep.
You would do that for me?
We're dating.
Okay. Well, I want to try and be straightforward with you and let you know that we're not anymore.
What do you mean?
We're not dating anymore. I'm sorry.
And it takes him a while to now he can't catch up to wait, what are you saying?
You're breaking up with me?
You are going to introduce me to people I wouldn't normally have the chance to meet. What the
Sorkin is one of the best at the cutoff line and the restating. That's one of his techniques that he just is so good at.
What is that supposed to mean?
Wait, settle down.
What is it supposed to mean?
Erica, the reason we're able to sit here and drink right now is because you used to sleep with the door guy.
I mean, if we talked about going from bad to worse, man.
The door guy, his name is Bobby. I have not slept with the door guy. The door guy is a friend of mine, and he's a perfectly good class of people. And what part of Long Island are you from?
Wimbledon.
Here's the thing. The way that Zuckerberg talks to people, everybody, and then after this moment at the bar where she breaks up with him, Zuckerberg doesn't talk to Erica like that ever again. He doesn't talk to her. In fact, when he sees her maybe a couple times again in the movie, he's like thrown. He doesn't know how to act around her, where he seems like he knows how to act around everybody else.
Yeah.
Like he's certainly thinks he is above everyone. But when it comes to Rosebud, when it comes to Erica, she's pulling the strings, and he is like jello in her hands. Really.
Yeah.
Well, and this is I by the way, I am 100% agreeing that she is Rosebud, 100%, and particularly with the way that the movie is bookended, and I think this is one of the really, as a movie, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
As a choice, artistically, about a real person, this frames the entire film. Her rejection of him and his treatment of her sets up exactly how we're going to feel about this character for the whole movie. And this is not true. There is, by the way, we're going to see him go home, have a couple of beers, and blog about someone and call her a bitch. Mark Zuckerberg really did do that. It's not a person named Erica Albright. The name has changed and some of the things were changed. But the idea that there's this one person that he couldn't get, that he is obsessed about, which essentially Sorkin uses as the motivation, the defining thing of this character, that is not true.
In real life. Right.
In real life.
Yeah.
But it's still a fantastic scene. I love, by the way, the line, dating you is exhausting. It's like dating a Stairmaster.
I know.
That's so good.
Sorkin won the Oscar, man.
He says, Mark says more condescending things about BU, about her need to study. And Fincher, when he got the script, he's read the first 8 pages of the scene. And he says, if she doesn't punch him in the face, I'm putting this script down and I'm never going to read another page. Then he gets to the final moment of the scene and goes, I'll keep reading.
You are probably going to be a very successful computer person. You're going to go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. And I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It'll be because you're an asshole.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Ouch.
So, you see, Fincher looked at it as how a man would react, which is to punch, right? But the woman just will eviscerate, has the ability to eviscerate you with a line like that. It's so well written by Sorkin. And it finally shuts him up. It finally shuts him up because he's like, I'll apologize. You want to apologize? I mean it. I apologize. And nothing's going to work. The thing with women, once you cross that line, man, you're not ever coming back. You're not ever coming back. And so when she says that, especially with a woman with strength and a spine and inner belief in herself, you're not coming back. And so in that moment, he is trying to find his way back, or in the back half of the scene, he's trying to find his way back, and she's not going to let it happen. And at the end, she drops the hammer because he won't just accept it. Because he tells her, you don't need to study. He's like telling her what she needs to do. And it's like, no, respect my wishes, respect what I'm saying, let this go. But he won't. And so eventually, he pushes her to have that final moment where she eviscerates him with something that he can't fix.
So there's a distinction I'm going to try to articulate that I'm not sure that I can, but there is when there are times, all of us have had fights with people that we love. All of us, I'm sure, have said things that we regret. There are certain things that you can come back from.
Yeah.
But what you can't come back from is where you actually reveal your true feelings about the other person, because those are your true feelings. His condescension towards her is so revealing of the basic fundamental disrespect that he has for Erica. There's no apologizing for how you feel. Like, there's nothing he could say that would translate to the fact that he doesn't respect her. And that's what she heard. Yeah. And she says, you're an asshole. And she walks out. His reaction after Erica gets up and leaves is huge.
Yeah.
Fincher. So first of all, they had 2 cameras going this whole time. And frankly, with Aaron Sorkin dialogue, you almost have to have multiple cameras because it's so overlapping and it's so tight. There's no way that 2 different takes can match each other. And so the fact that they have both cameras on makes it much, much easier.
How many cameras did they have?
Two for this scene, mostly 2 cameras.
Oh,
Because
two.
2 people. Later on, I think they actually had 3 cameras, which it makes it harder to light. It makes things more complicated in terms of cinematography. But for the actors, it's great because you're really doing the whole scene. But they did 99 takes.
What?
What? 99? How many days is that? Like how
2 days. 2
Oh,
days
goodness.
of this scene. And here's what's interesting. So a couple of things about this. And by the way, this isn't the only scene that had 90 takes.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
my
Fuck you.
He's shooting. It's so funny. We just did a whole bunch of Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino loves film. He likes film, old school film. Fincher loves digital. And this is part of why. Film is expensive. You can't shoot 99. And it's time consuming because you got to reload. You got to do the digital. You could just like go again. It's easy. Doesn't cost anything. Costs time. And that's also why he can blow the first 3 or 4 takes by having the background all talking. Because none of that audio is going to be usable because you've made so much sound, but he doesn't care. And then the other thing he says that Fincher says, part of why he likes to do so many takes is he wants to, and this is his word, is to casualize the lines. Is he wants to tire out the actors enough so that it ceases to be so precious, that it's just, and, I know, John, you and I both been in plays. You do those scenes when you're rehearsing over and over and over again. And there's a place where you get bored with the script, bored with your performance. And then there's a place where you move past that. And that's usually where you kind of discover the magic, and that's where Fincher's going. All right, but 99 takes is a lot.
So let me ask you a question. If this scene was done in 99 takes, was it take 99 that was used?
No. Well, there were probably so I'll tell you something about the post-production process that I was going to save to the end, but it applies to your question. So first of all, the editors are editing while they're shooting. They're trying to put together an assembly. That's always what editors are trying to do. It's way harder to do that when you have a director shooting 99 takes than it is when you have a director shooting 6 takes because you have to watch them all. So Fincher isn't just controlling an anal in terms of performance, in terms of rehearsal, in terms of set design, in terms of camera angles, but he is controlling an anal in post. And so what he will do is, first of all, they will go through every single line on every single take and look for what is the best version that Jesse Eisenberg did of this particular line. And so when they're cutting back and forth between the two, you could be cutting from take 38 to take 42 to take 17 as you go back and forth. But that is not all Fincher does, because Fincher will look, and by the way, if you want to really understand how some of post and editing works, again, I highly recommend these behind the scenes, because you will watch 8 takes of Jesse Eisenberg saying the same line in this behind the scenes stuff, and you will see the subtle differences. This one a little more aggressive, this one emphasizing a different point, and the lines have totally different meanings depending on how the actor delivers them. So they're looking line by line, but that's not all Fincher does, because sometimes Fincher will go, you know what, I really like the visual performance of this line, but I like the audio performance from a different line. So he will pull the audio from a different take, sometimes using digital effects to get the mouth shape to fit exactly, because the pacing of the line will be different. But that's not all he does.
Oh, geez.
Because sometimes he likes one word audio from one line and word from a different line to put them together to get exactly the performance that he wants.
And that is what Steve Morris does when he's editing the Cine-Files and Enterprise Incidents.
So I certainly have pulled some tricks sometimes. I mean, I've never, ever have I pulled. I mean, there are times where I have found an from one place and stuck it in to make it sound different. There are certainly and definitely, like, a very common technique. This is not the crazy Fincher level of analness, is if I'm cutting back and forth, and John and I are doing a conversation and I'm cutting from your shot to my shot. Well, when we cut to my off-camera shot, I might use a different take of the audio because I like it while I'm looking at John's face. That's totally, that happens in every single movie. That happens all the time. Or even take 2 halves of a line and stick them together in an off-camera piece of dialogue. To do it on camera and match one visual shot with a different piece of audio and 3 different audio lines, that's nuts. I've never, ever, ever done anything remotely like that. That is a level of crazy that is beyond. But you can't argue with success. I mean, movies are made out of the tiniest little details, and Fincher cares about all those details.
Yeah.
One other thing, Jesse Eisenberg has panic attacks before shooting scenes. You know, he has a lot of anxiety and nervousness, and getting to the end of this scene was huge. Like, we did it. 99 takes, 9 pages of dialogue. He got to the end.
And was this the first scene of the movie that was shot?
I don't think it was. I think it was the first big scene that was shot. I think they might have done some other smaller things first, but I think this is the first big one. And what's interesting, it sounds like I get the sense that this movie was essential in the process of Aaron Sorkin becoming a director in his own right.
Oh,
It was
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. When you look at the movies he did direct, you know, Trial Chicago 7.
Right, but he did the Lucy movie.
Yeah.
That
probably inspired him to be a director. But at the top of the conversation, when I said that I spoke to Aaron Sorkin at the press day, so the conversation I had with him was, this movie is Citizen Kane. I went down the list that I gave you guys. I said, was that your plan? Did you mean to do that? And he said, yes, absolutely. This is Citizen Kane. It is Citizen Kane of the 21st century. It is. I absolutely was very, very, very much inspired by Citizen Kane when it came to the arc of the story, the connections to the character, the parallels. And I just felt kind of proud that I kind of picked it up on my own, but that it was validated by the guy who wrote the friggin' screenplay was pretty awesome.
I want to talk about music. So
let's do that.
The music is, and we'll talk about it throughout, but so in the script, I believe it was in the script, at this moment, Aaron Sorkin had written in a song that he wanted to play. Fincher did not like that song. He wanted the scene to end with Beyond Belief by Elvis Costello. That's what he wanted playing at the end of the scene and over the titles. Everyone on the production, Aaron didn't like that idea. Everyone on the production was like, that's totally the wrong generation. These are, 2000s. Like, you can't have the Elvis Costello. Doesn't fit the mood. It doesn't fit anything. And Fincher was like, no, I want this. Trent Reznor is the composer from Nine Inch Nails with Atticus. Is it
Atticus Ross?
They have just are working. We'll talk more about how this whole thing was scored, but the process was very different. Is what they were doing was kind of working on sketches. So they'd play some stuff, they'd mix some stuff, they'd send stuff to Fincher, not necessarily connected to a specific moment in the film, just here's some music.
Yeah.
This piece of music came in and Fincher listened to it and he brought it to Aaron Sorkin. And there was no intention that this was going to play in the title. And as soon as both of them heard it, they went, goodbye, Elvis Costello, goodbye, other idea.
Wow.
The other thing, the title music is going to be used 3 times in the film. It's central to the film, this theme. And each time it's recorded slightly differently, which I found really interesting. For the first one, it's played that piano. It's like a droning sound with this piano, these kind of piano chords coming in. And it's played on an upright piano and it's mic'd very close. Later on, it's played on a different piano and the mic placement is different, more farther away. And the final one, the mic placement is very far away.
Let me ask you a question about the score, because I'm glad you brought it up, because of course you're going to bring it up, because on the Cine-Files, you guys leave no stone unturned.
We try.
But when Zuckerberg goes back to his dorm room, I guess, after getting his heart broken, this score by Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor, it hits a few different emotions. Like, it strikes this balance between being haunting and there's a melancholy to it, a melancholy that is supported by the exquisite cinematography of Jeff Cronenweth. I can't explain it, but it really stays with me. Like, I'm hearing the score in my head as I'm just talking with you about it right now.
One of the interesting, so here's how, when I teach a class on scoring, how I say it works. And I'm going to say that because that's not at all how it worked on this movie, which is just evidence that I want to point out over and over and over again is that I have strong opinions about how you should do stuff, and those opinions are not right. They're just my opinions. There's lots of different ways to do stuff. So in my mind, you're working on the movie and you have a spotting session with a composer and you go over moment by moment. This is what I want the music to be doing emotionally here. This is when you discuss different styles of doing it. And maybe you're working in the John Williams tradition of leitmotifs and you have Indiana Jones's theme and you have this person's theme. And lots of times the music is going to come to the fore in a way and really tell the story emotionally. None of that is how any of this happened. Is that what happened was, first of all, Trent and Atticus are hanging out in a room and they have all sorts of instruments. And it seems like, and I don't know a lot about him, many people know much more about Trent Reznor, but from what I could tell, he's pretty fascinated by different kinds of instruments from different eras, different kinds of synthesizers, different sort of unique instruments that make a specific kind of sound. And so they talk a lot about the movie. And he hasn't had a spotting session with Fincher. Fincher hasn't told him what he wanted. They haven't sat down and gone through scene by scene. They're just kind of talking about emotions. And the first thing they decided was there's like nonstop talking in this film. You can't create a strong melody because a strong melody would compete with the dialogue. You have to have something that can play under all of that super, super fast-paced action. So that's the first thing is they rejected melodies. And then what would happen is that Trent would pull out his guitar and he would play something. And then they would pull out one of these other instruments and he would play something. And Atticus is recording all these things and they play this and then they play that. And then what Trent Reznor said was, and then I get really frustrated with the whole process and I hate everything that I've done. And I go, fuck it, I'm going to go take a walk. And he leaves. And then Atticus, and he might even say, don't use that last thing I recorded. That was terrible. I hate that. And then Atticus will probably start with that last thing that Trent hated. And then he'll put them all together because he's the producer and kind of mixing things in ways that Trent never intended at all. And then he'll come back in and listen to the playback and then they'll talk about that. And they did this a bunch and they came up with 30 or 40 minutes of material, not directed at any particular point in the movie, and just sent it to Fincher saying, here, check this out. You probably won't like any of it, but this is what we've been doing. What do you think? Fincher gets it and goes, this is perfect, and starts putting it in the movie at places that he thinks. That is so different from how movies are usually scored, you know? And that's how you get this weird, droning, non-melodic, profound sort of undertone. It acts as like an ambience and an undertone throughout the whole film in this really powerful way.
It's very powerful. I agree completely. And, you know, maybe it's the droning aspect that stays with me. Maybe it's that, and you know, you hear these three notes played on a piano over the droning sound of the score, and there are different tones of the three notes, and it's very simple in that way, but it's so effective, and it's unlike any of those kind of scores that you hear. That you're referring to, you know, Steve, from the greats, so to speak.
Well, I think this is what's fascinating about Reznor and Ross, you know, because Reznor started doing scores back with Natural Born Killers. He produced the soundtrack for that, and then eventually moved on to Lost Highway, and then 1 Hour of Photo. Remember that Robin Williams film directed by Mark Romanek, and then moving on to Social Network, and then did Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and then Gone Girl. So, you know, working with Fincher has been something that's really been a good thing for Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and their abilities to bring these feelings out in these films that are the combination of everything you just mentioned emotionally, Scott. How they're able to weave those feelings in, and a lot of those themes and those multiple emotions at the same time are also occurring in these other films. So clearly this is a staple of their ability to create this. And then of course they did Soul, which is really a completely left field
Totally.
Soul.
Beautiful film too. Beautiful
film.
Yep.
But it's completely different score than you've heard before that they do. So I love that. And yes, absolutely. This is one of those films where the score is just as important as any performance, any script, or any direction, because it really does decorate what you're feeling as you watch the film. To me, it's not necessarily a noir, but it's a very visually dark film for a majority of the film. And it's because this is a very dark dude inside. And so that's reflected out as you're watching the movie. And you could argue maybe that's another way that it's connected to Citizen Kane, because there's a lot of dark stuff in Citizen Kane, dark scenes in Citizen Kane. And so maybe there's an element of that connected through for what he's going through here.
What we're seeing is Mark heading home and running through what we think is Harvard. It's actually mostly shot at Johns Hopkins. Harvard hasn't let a movie shoot there since 1970, when Love Story damaged a lot of Harvard's property, and they just went, that's it. We're done. No more movies.
Never ever trust a producer when they tell you they're not going to destroy your property. When they shoot on the set, they will destroy your property.
So I will tell you, Scott, here is another parallel with Citizen Kane.
Yep.
One thing I learned when we did our episodes on Citizen Kane that I really didn't know is that Citizen Kane, I think, has more special effects shots than Star Wars. It is so, and it's all sorts of special effects shots that you never really think about because it's a realistic film. But there's so many mats that are used. There's so many camera tricks that are used, all these kinds of things that are used to make Citizen Kane look like this. The same is true of Social Network. There are so many special effects in this movie. One of them is that we're not shooting at Harvard, but Harvard buildings are matted in the backgrounds of all sorts of shots to make us feel like we're at Harvard.
Interesting.
And of course, you know, when we get to the Winklevi, there's like ridiculous special effects going on.
Yeah.
And of course, when they're talking outside in the freezing cold and they're breathing, you're seeing like,
That's
you know,
CG,
that's totally CGI. That looks like it. You know, that
Yeah,
they've never really been able to perfect that in any film.
Yeah.
You know, but I did not know about the Harvard stuff. I thought it was shot at Harvard.
Yeah. So he gets back home, grabs a beer, and immediately, of course, jumps on his computer and writes in his blog. And he really did have a blog, and he really did write nasty things about this woman, not Erica Albright, but someone else.
Erica Albright's a bitch. Do you think that's because her family changed their name from Albrecht? Or do you think it's because all BU girls are bitches?
Harsh.
And then, if that wasn't harsh enough, how about...
For the record, she may look like a 34C, but she's getting all kinds of help from our friends at Victoria's Secret. She's a 34B, as in barely anything there. False advertising.
And Victoria's Secret is something we will hear down the line.
Right.
Him blogging about her, we see that now as a standard practice. People go, well, I've heard this. Is it true? We see that going on now on Twitter all the time. People throw up stuff to see if people will react to it and to get reactions from people about it. And they insinuate incorrect things or false things just to see if people will react to it. And he, in essence, is almost prescient doing that here in this movie, because that is going to be now the standard practice of a lot of people who want to rile people up with misinformation on social media. So it's fascinating to watch him do this here, and born from the place of being rejected. Instead of going home and licking his wounds and learning the lesson of communicating better, he goes vindictive and gets on a public format to embarrass her without thinking about the fact of how it will affect her down the road.
One thing I want to point out or say about that is the thing I had to keep reminding myself is these are kids, like, Zuckerberg at this time is like, 19.
Right.
And I think about all the stupid things I did at 19, and none of it was recorded on the internet because there wasn't a way to do that when I was 19.
Yeah.
Thank God. Exactly.
Yeah, for me too, man, please.
The truth is, she has a nice face. I need to do something to take my mind off her. Easy enough, except I need an idea.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about this film is it's about a guy with minimal or very odd social skills creating a social network. So right there's a very weird thing. It's about the desire to be social, to make connections from a person who has real problems making connections. And it's also about, and this is things that we didn't really understand, or because this was also new in 2010, but FOMO, fear of missing out. It's about seeing other people's lives, and it's about trolling, another thing that didn't really exist then, but that is exactly what he's doing. And it's about the fact that the internet is permanent, because we know that Mark Zuckerberg actually wrote these terrible things because we can read them today.
Yeah,
because the internet is permanent.
That aspect of Zuckerberg, this sort of oxymoron, that he is a socially awkward guy creating a social network, is a complexity about character that is unique to this film compared to Charles Kane in Citizen Kane. It's, I would never refer to Charles Foster Kane as socially awkward in any way, but that is an excellent observation about Zuckerberg that gives Social Network, the movie, another level of complexity that I never thought about before.
Well, I think, and again, this goes to the 21st century Citizen Kane of that Harvard Final Club network of the elite. That is the 20th century. That is not what the elite is today. The elite, Charles Foster Kane and William Randolph Hearst hobnobbed with all the elite. They were it's funny. Someone had just read a book. It's from the 40s called The Power Elite, which I read recently. And it is all about the power structure in the United States. And the thing this guy that recommended it to me was saying was that it really needs to be updated because that power structure is totally different. And it's Bill Gates and Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg. That's the power structure today. And those guys are not in the Final Club. They're not hobnobbing. They're not having cotillions and coming out parties. They're not doing all that stuff that Charles Foster Kane was doing. This is a different world. This is the ruling of the geeks.
The Kirkland Facebook is open on my desktop, and some of these people have pretty horrendous Facebook pics.
Oh, no.
By the way, had you heard this term, a Facebook, before Facebook?
Absolutely not. Never heard of it. John, did you?
Nope.
Me neither. And I think it's because we're old. I think that this idea, what I learned was that if you went to college in 2000,
Speak for yourself.
well, I believe that I am the oldest one here. I think I'm older than Scott by a month.
I'm 35. So go ahead.
If you went to college in 2002, they had this thing when you moved into your dorm of like a book with pictures of everybody's faces, so you could meet people. Like that was a normal, which I didn't really know.
Yeah.
And we get this idea from Billy Olson, one of his roommates, that they're going to about having farm animals and have people vote on who's hotter. And that starts the beginning of this idea. And what we're going to see now is two things intercut. And again, this idea that Aaron Sorkin wants you to be behind. And I think Fincher wants you to be behind too. I mean, if you think about a movie like Fight Club or like Seven, you're not up to speed with what the hell is going on. You're behind. And so now we start with this shot going down. At first, I didn't even recognize that I'm looking in a bus, but going down the aisle of a bus at all these beautiful women, and like, what does this have to do with anything? And what we're actually intercutting is these women arriving at what we heard about, which was a Final Club. And we're intercutting from that back to Mark, who says,
the first thing we're going to need is a lot of pictures. Unfortunately, Harvard doesn't keep a public centralized Facebook, so I'm going to have to get all the images from the individual houses that people are in. Let the hacking begin.
So we're going to intercut this party setup with Mark hacking all these different houses. And by the way, one of the things Fincher said is he loves to show competence. He loves to show this person really knows what they're doing, whether it's sports or medicine or anything he's showing. And this is the scene where we see that Mark is a genius at hacking. The other funny thing is that Aaron, who read all of the real Mark Zuckerberg's blogs from this time where Mark Zuckerberg described all the hacking he did, was very grateful because Aaron has no idea what he's talking about in this whole thing. All of this is just directly out of Mark Zuckerberg's actual blogs.
Next is Elliot. They're also open, but with no indexes on Apache. I can run an empty search and it returns all the images in the database in a single page.
And it's sort of at the point that the women walk into this old house and we see all these guys in suits and all this obvious opulence that you go, oh, I get it. I love the contrast between the suits and the fancy surrounding and the guy that starts talking is wearing a stupid looking headband.
Yeah.
Because it just tells you so much about what this world is.
Excuse me, everybody. You are at one of the oldest, one of the most exclusive clubs, not just at Harvard, but in the world. And I want to welcome you all to Phoenix Club's first party of the fall semester.
Man, my parties at college didn't look anything like this.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Not even close. I mean, look, this world of an Ivy League college. I went to Penn State. My GPA was laughable. I studied something I hated.
What did you study?
I studied, you're going to laugh. I studied accounting.
Hey, I could
Wow.
I studied accounting, and here I am talking to you guys on a deep dive about the Social Network. That degree is coming into real good use.
You owe $60,000 on your taxes. I can just see it.
At the firm
But
of Mantz, and Mantz.
but I did minor in film studies.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
you know, like I did what I had to do so I could do what I wanted to do.
And while Mark is hacking away, they're taking pills and they're getting naked and there's dancing and everyone is hot and everyone is beautiful. And this again is establishing Mark's outsider status, and it's saying, and this is how the juxtaposition of images in film is this remarkable power, which is that it says by looking at these things side by side that this is what Mark doesn't have and this is what he wants. It's telling us a motivation, even though that's not necessarily what he's saying, but like that is what we see. And it's so connected to the creation of the Social Network, you know?
Yeah, this sequence is so fascinating because he is sitting in his little dorm room with all his little friends who haven't been invited to these parties and can't get through. And you're watching what goes on at these parties and what happens and, you know, the status symbol of the parties, right? And those people think they're sitting on top of the world and have no idea of the earthquake that is coming, that is being created in the small little dorm room by Mark Zuckerberg and these other guys. And eventually, of course, Eduardo when he shows up. So you see that all going through as a juxtaposition. He wants what they have. And in a moment of anger and bitterness and frustration, and as you said, Steve, there's a young kid, so the emotional development, maybe not 100% there, lashes out in a certain way and then continues the lashing out by using his intelligence to create this thing in a way to denigrate women, in a way without knowing, maybe intentionally, possibly intentionally, possibly not intentionally, to, you know, compare women to other women and their status and their look and all of this stuff. And it becomes, in essence, a small bomb that explodes, and the reverberations are stuff that we're still dealing with now. But his desire versus what he's creating is so interesting when you're watching these sequences juxtaposed against each other.
Yep.
Let me ask you a question. Have we met Eduardo Saverin yet?
That's the next, that's
He's about
literally
to
the
do
next line. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason I bring that up is because, Steve, this conversation has made me think of something about this film that I had not thought about every time I've seen it. But in this conversation, fellas, talking about how in Citizen Kane, the way that Kane starts off is very idealistic and admirable, and then he descends. He loses his character, becomes unlikable, whereas in Social Network, Zuckerberg is unlikable from start to finish. So now that got me thinking, why is Saverin friends with him?
I don't know. I've had the same question. I don't get it. I really don't get their friendship at all.
I'm just now coming to that epiphany. Like, why is Saverin even friends with this guy? Because Saverin is a good-looking guy. He's going after a club, a frat, if you will, that you know, Zuckerberg has no chance of getting into, and could seed jealousy that snowballs by the end of the film, leading to Saverin getting screwed out of Facebook. But why is he even friends with him? Like, John, what do you think?
Well, I think this happens. You know, I think you have those. I think it happens in certain groups. There are people who are just part of that group, and you're like, why? Why is this person a part of the group? Why are you?
You're totally right, John.
Yeah, right. I mean, why are you involved in this? And it's because, as you said, Steve, earlier, this film is told, in essence, by Eduardo, from Eduardo's point of view. You know, kind of like Leland telling the story of Kane from his point of view, or Bernstein, or these other people. That's another way this could be a Citizen Kane connection, because, as you said, the author did not interview Zuckerberg, but interviewed Eduardo. So if you're using that book as a basis, you're in essence doing the Citizen Kane model of having everyone else talk about Kane, but not Kane himself talk about himself, and not getting the point of view of his experience doing what he did. So we're seeing it through other people's eyes. And so with Eduardo, of course, he's going to paint himself as the good-looking guy who can get women if he wanted to, who's got the program and the code to help him do these kinds of things. So it's a way of what's the term? Burgeoning up your resume, building up your resume, or whatever it is. You're just kind of padding your resume. Yeah, exactly. He's padding his resume with all of these things about himself, so that we ask this question: why is he involved? And so those kinds of things. But
padding. I thought you were going to say lying.
Well, no,
it's kind of the same thing, I guess, a little.
Right. You're just building up what's already there. But everybody around him, obviously, are all these kind of nerds and kind of have these things. And so I think no matter how much Eduardo and Andrew Garfield is a good-looking dude, he clearly has issues and wants to be part of this club, and he's caught between two worlds. So.
One of the things I read about the real Mark Zuckerberg is that while he did frequently have these weird pauses, so someone would ask him a question and he would just sort of stare for 30 seconds before responding, which is something it sounds like he worked very hard to fix and doesn't do anymore. But And he also had this ability, he would just stare at you when he was displeased, which people described as the eye of Sauron, if Mark was not happy with you.
Wow.
But it also sounds like he was affable and he did have social skills and he did have friends. And that this characterization that we're seeing in this movie of this really removed person is not so. I'm sure there were reasons why the real Eduardo Saverin became friends with him, even though we're not seeing him here. So I agree. Andrew Garfield, I think, is great. He originally was asked to read for Mark. Ooh. So he spent 2.5 weeks preparing the role for Mark. And he came in, and this is so true when you're casting. Some people, great actors will come in, and the minute they open their mouth, you're like, no, you're not right for this. You're great. You're not right for this part. And so Fincher very apologetically said, I'm really, really sorry, but would you be interested in reading for Eduardo? Thinking, this it's going to be a demotion, and Andrew's like, "Are you kidding? I'll do any part you want in this movie. I want to be in this movie."
You're David Fincher. Yeah.
And what he said, which I find really interesting, is he said the 2.5 weeks he spent preparing for Mark were invaluable in him playing Eduardo. Is that because he had thought so deeply about this guy that it really, really helped.
I think it's a great point, Steve, because looking at his performance throughout the whole movie, even when he's upset at Zuckerberg in that scene in the office later on, he has empathy for Mark. For whatever reason, even in the deposition scenes that we said we're going to get to here in the early part of the film, you can tell he knows who Mark is, but he also has a little bit of empathy for Mark throughout, and that's an element that he's playing. It's not overt. It's just hanging out there. And I think with the 2.5 weeks of studying him gave him that kind of extra layer to throw into his performance as an actor. And it's an excellent thing to consider when you look at it.
I think that Andrew Garfield was terrific in this movie. And I didn't realize that he had read for Zuckerberg. But Garfield's performance, his commitment to his performance, the arc that he goes through, now that's an arc, okay?
Yeah.
But shockingly, while Jesse Eisenberg was nominated for an Academy Award, Andrew Garfield was not. You know how many people to this day will reference Andrew Garfield and say, oh yeah, when he was nominated for The Social Network, and I go, no, he was not. He was snubbed. That was a snub. He should have been, but he was not nominated.
And right now, Mark is thrilled that he's here because he needs an algorithm that apparently Eduardo created to rank chess players. And he says, because we're ranking girls. And then they do this thing that I've seen in so many movies that I still am asking the question is, does anybody actually do this? Which is writing the formula on the window as the shot is going. It's always a great shot. It's great in Beautiful Mind. It's great in Good Will Hunting. And I'm like, do people do this? They write on windows? Is that a thing? But they do that, and it's great. And we're talking about this, how we're going to figure out ranking these girls. And while they're thinking about ranking girls' attractiveness, we cut to some very attractive girls back at this party, now mostly undressed and kissing each other. And all the, by the way, whenever there were things when I was in high school and college and things like that happened at a party, I was always in the other room. People come up to me, it's like, Steve, can you believe that so-and-so took their top off? And I'm like, no, I was getting a soda. I always missed it.
Good stuff. So here were the other actors in the supporting role. Christian Bale for fighter John Hawkes and Winter's Bone, Jeremy Renner of The Town, Ruffalo for Kids Are All Right, and Jeffrey Rush for The King's Speech. Who would you take out for?
I remember really liking Winter's Bone, but I don't remember that performance.
Hawks.
Those are all good performances.
I think I would.
Yeah, the Winter's Bone. Look. Obviously, J-Law was.
Yeah,
that's right. That was her breakthrough movie. Look, I would. Yeah, you're right. I would take out Hawks and put in Garfield.
Yeah,
because Christian Bale is astounding in The Fighter.
Yeah.
Oh, he's great. He won. He won the Oscar.
And then we finished coming up with this program to compare girls' hotness, and they put it out on email, and they say,
who should we send it to first?
Dwyer.
Neil.
Who are you gonna send it to?
Just a couple of people. The question is, who are they gonna send it to?
the reason I want to highlight this line is this is the entire history of Facebook. How do we get more people to share our stuff and join and be more engaged? That is essentially Mark Zuckerberg's life work.
Also, the way he delivers the line is malevolent, right? Yep. He's like, I'm going to share it with two people. I don't know who they're going to share it with. So there's a malevolence to it where he feels, I've got buffers here where they can't lead it back to me. But,
So they send it out, and immediately guys start playing the game and are loving it, and are it's the middle of the night, and they're all obsessively on this thing comparing women. And here is another small important fact: Face Smash, or whatever this thing was called, was men and women. It wasn't just women.
Okay, so for the constructs of the movie, they make it women, but it's men and women. Interesting. I did not know that. Okay.
And the thing is, that's so fundamental because one is connected to Erica Albright, who dumped him, while he can't go to the hot party with all the hot women. And now he is doing this incredibly misogynistic thing that was not, in fact, misogynistic, because it was all sorts of things about surface and all sorts of things that weren't cool, but it wasn't just about women. That is a fundamental change.
Yeah. That is a big change. Absolutely, it is.
And then we cut to Erica Albright. And at first you think, oh, they're getting the comparison thing. But in fact, her roommate has found the blog and says, you don't want to read it. And of course, I mean, if someone says you don't want to read it, how many people don't read it,
Yeah, I do want to take a moment here to appreciate Rooney Mara again. Her nonverbal performance here when those two guys come through with the bra and they're like, is this yours or are you a tranny and whatever, which is a horrible thing to say, right? But Rooney Mara's eyes as she is grasping the horror of being embarrassed in this way by a guy like this and the utter shame of it and her the tears welling, like it is a powerful moment that she delivers in that non-verbally in that moment when she realizes like the embarrassment. I'm sure there's a lot of women who've been embarrassed in this way, who can absolutely relate to that moment.
So another person we meet, by the way, who's excited at how much traffic this thing is getting is their roommate, Dustin Moskowitz, who's going to be a very, very wealthy guy at some point, played by Joseph Mazzello, who I don't think we've seen Joseph Mazzello on the Cine-Files since he was hanging from an electric fence in Jurassic Park. What's crazy is that
the bass player in Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
Oh.
But we haven't gotten to that one yet.
We have not gotten to that. Nor I don't like that movie that much. So I don't know that it's very high on my list. But the amazing thing, David Fincher says he didn't realize this was the kid from Jurassic Park until they were wrapping the movie, and someone told him.
That's awesome.
An awful lot of traffic. I think maybe we shouldn't shut it down before we get into trouble.
The look from Mark Zuckerberg at that moment says so much. Does he want to get in trouble?
I think a little bit, yeah. And as you said, these are kids. Not kids. These are young people. And so young people sometimes like to push the boundaries. And certainly Zuckerberg throughout this whole movie pushes the boundaries from the opening scene with Erica all the way through to the end. He pushes the boundaries of what should and should not be done and the behavior that should or should not be happening in a certain situation.
I'm going to take that one step further, Johnny. Does he want to shut it down?
No.
Shut it down. He doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
Right. He doesn't care. He's giving that look, Steve. That is a look of judgment. Like, grow the F up. Smarten up, be a man, grow a pair of balls. Who the hell cares if we are going to get in trouble or they're going to shut us down? Be a man. Like, that's where you're basically separating the men from the boys in this case.
Scott, I'm going to take it one step further than you did, because not only do I agree with everything both of you have said, but I think he's excited about the idea of taking down Harvard's internet. I think he totally sees it as an accomplishment. There's this moment later on in the ad board where he says, I think I should get some recognition, or whatever his line is he's doing something really impressive. From his laptop computer at 4 a.m. in the dorm, he's going to crash the whole damn system.
Well, there's a very unusual amount of traffic to the switch at Kirkland.
You're saying it's unusual for 4 a.m?
No, this would be unusual for halftime at the Super Bowl.
Great line. Yeah.
Yep. And that is exactly what happens. He crashes the system, and Eduardo says,
You don't think?
Jesse Eisenberg's so good at these kind of little looks.
I do.
And they see the network's down, and he smiles.
Unless it's a coincidence, I think this is us. It's not a coincidence.
So at the moment that Mark Zuckerberg has crashed the Harvard internet, I think, and look, I know we haven't gotten very far into the movie. And guess what? Welcome to the Cine-Files with Scott Mantz as our special guest.
Yeah.
This is what you signed up for. I have loved the conversation so far, and we're going to end part 1 of our explanation of the social network. How many parts is this going to be? Nobody knows. But again, I'll say
that makes me very happy, because when we did Blade Runner, we did it in one part. When we did Wrath of Khan, we did it one part. We're doing Social Network, and I'm thinking, like, I've been wanting to do this now for like 3 years, and I've seen you do like 15 parts on Godfather Part 2 or whatever it is. And I'm like, hell no, or we are so not doing Social Network in one part. So bring it on, mister.
You know what's funny, Scott, and I think John and I have talked about this off mic a couple of times, is we've redone some of our earliest episodes because they were so short, like Die Hard, like Reservoir Dogs. We just didn't give them the time. Our Wrath of Khan episode and our Blade Runner episode, which are both one-parters, those are two of the best conversations we've ever had on the Cine-Files.
Yeah.
And so I'm really torn between, I don't want to, they're great. Could we talk longer about those movies today? Absolutely. But I also don't want to mess with success. You know what I mean? Like, I thought those are some of our best episodes.
Definitely.
But for now, this is the end of part 1 of the Social Network. And of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts about the first few scenes of the movie. You can visit us on our Facebook page. You can follow us on Twitter at Cine_Files. You can follow the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. If you haven't been subscribed to the show, I think you should go from Apple Podcasts, subscribe there, to YouTube, subscribe there, go to Spotify, subscribe there, and everywhere that you can, you should probably leave a review, because they really do help us a lot. If you want to support the show, listen to our Cine-Files shorts, and also we're building up some new things in the community for them to be more involved in the process of making the Cine-Files. That's patreon.com/the Cine-Files. If you want to buy or stream the Social Network along with every other movie we've ever reviewed, that's at cinephiles.net. And if you want to reach me, it's SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. And of course, my other podcast with the great Scott Mantz, Enterprise Incidents, where we are halfway through the animated series, and we just recorded a fantastic conversation with a fantastic guest yesterday. John, how would people find you?
You can always find me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says. We just crossed 27,000 subscribers today as we're recording, which is, I know for some people, small potatoes, but I'm the little engine that could.
Congrats, Johnny. That's amazing.
Thank you. It's, I'm very proud of that. And also my other podcasts that I do, the Geek Buddies and the Hot Mic, that are out there for you all with FYC cohort for Scott Mantz, Jeff Snyder. Yeah.
By the way, if you love movies, and obviously you do because you've listened to just part 1, where we basically got out of Zuckerberg getting broken up with, you've got to be listening to the Hot Mic, because John Rocha and Jeff Snyder are breaking news on a level that even the trades cannot keep up with. And that is a very, very, very big deal. They are very big time. And for everyone listening to the Cine-Files, please share the Cine-Files on your social media platforms so more people can discover the greatness of the Cine-Files. And we're talking about Mark Zuckerberg, who has a God complex. So just like Steve Morris on Enterprise Incidents will take one of our Star Trek episodes and say, hey, if you like this, listen to this episode on the Cine-Files. If you like films about someone with a God complex, then please listen to our deep dive of Who Mourns for Adonais. It features a god, Apollo, with a great conversation. And John Rocha has joined us for 4 great episodes on Enterprise Incidents, and he's going to be back for an animated series episode. But once again, everyone, this is the creme de la creme of movie podcasts. So please keep getting the word out about the Cine-Files. This is the real deal.
That is one of my favorite segues ever, right there. Scott, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I'm sorry it's been far too long. And if people wanted to reach or find you, is there any way they could do that?
Oh, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Movie Mantz, and everything I do is posted on those platforms. You can just follow the Yellow Brick Road.
And I think that is it for this week. We will be back with part 2 of The Social Network right here on The Cine-Files.